Before we get into Byline Times' latest drop into Dan Wootton, let's take a little look back. Previously on people who definitely shouldn't be on air right now, Byline Times coverage of Dan. It all started on July 17th when Byline published Dan's online aliases, including Martin Branning and Maria Joseph. This is a crucial foundation piece for the rest of the articles. And then we go into Dan's workplace behavior on July 20th. And we hear of how allegations by colleagues against him were covered up and silenced. How the Sun in particular was willing to spend money to silence people instead of having to go to an employee tribunal where more information could be made public. The first two articles show us some similarities between his online presence and his workplace presence. On July 24th, we find out how Martin Branning targeted his first online victim. On July 26th, we finally get the answer to the question, how was he getting all this money? Turns out, it was from the Sun. Just a little misappropriation of funds. I love nothing more than a white-collar crime before my coffee in the morning. And then on July 28th, they report that the Sun and the Mail knew about the allegations against Dan beforehand. But that did not stop them from hypocritically gunning for the BBC and allegations against one of their news presenters. On August 1st, we revisit one of Dan's partners, Alex. He's the one that found the evidence of what Dan was up to while he was flat-sitting for Dan. We continue to see a pattern of blackmail and emotional abuse. August 3rd is what I like to call dumb crimin'. Like, did you take lessons from the guys from Home Alone? Because that was not the example. He used the same passwords for Maria Joseph and Martin Branning, and also used them for this really sketchy sounding DVD website in the early 2000s. Come on. Which brings us to August 9th and the celebrity targets that Dan went after. Not only does Byline Times reveal his targets, but they have receipts. I'm talking WhatsApp, I'm talking text messages, like, yikes. This is what Signal is for. There's so much in this article that I'm going to try to focus on what I found important and revealing. First of all, the fact that we have names of actual celebrities, reality TV stars, etc. seems bad. And all of their stories, along with the other victims that we've heard about, tell a similar tale. Dan targets people who either are in financially unstable situations and takes advantage of that, or he goes after people who are famous but not so famous that they don't need him on their side. But what's really damning is how Dan used his position as an entertainment reporter to target these individuals. Named in the article is The Only Way is Essex star Kirk Norcross and Big Brother contestant J.J. Bird. There is also an X Factor singer who was just out of his teens. It is Dan's first day as the editor-at-large for the Daily Mail. He had a brief stint there before going over to the Sun in 2011. He approaches 25-year-old J.J. Bird and says, I have a proposition for you. Dan says that he's an amateur photographer, he's working with these underwear brands, and they want to do some test shoots. JJ is trying to fund his boxing career, so he says okay. Plus, Dan was a big name in showbiz journalism. It's not someone that you could afford to alienate. So there is a big power imbalance in all of these stories. The X Factor singer says that he was at the Sun when Dan was the associate editor and that he was there to do a promotional thing for the paper. Dan was a big deal. Everyone knew he was the most powerful journalist in showbiz, and he kind of didn't know if he could turn it down, but he remembered thinking, why would this benefit me and what would I get from it? He was doing this at his place of work. Another celebrity that Byline Times did not name tells about his experience going to Dan's flat. The red flags are everywhere from the start when he gets to Dan's place. There are no other people there. There is no backdrop. Dan hands him just like a regular pair of boxers and he goes to change. Over the course of the shoot, Dan asks him to wear less and less clothing until finally he brings out latex and the guy's like, I'm not cool with this. He also wouldn't pose naked, so Dan refused to pay him the whole fee. And here is an example of what looks like Facebook Messenger of Dan trying to set these shoots up. And because I had to check, this is Dan's current Facebook photo. I also scrolled down to find more information, and he has a public post about supporting Ukraine in a fundraiser for his birthday on March 1st. His birthday is March 2nd. I'm sure Byline Times looked into this beforehand, but I wanted to check too. But this next part is where I literally did like the Macaulay Culkin Home Alone. So in 2019, Dan approaches The Only Way is Essex star Kirk on his own personal number via WhatsApp. And then he does it again the next day, and it's like 2 a.m. following the TV Choice Awards, which Dan attended. And Kirk found this very strange. Who contacts someone at 2 in the morning to talk about modeling opportunities? I love Dan's, "Hey man." It reminds me of, "How do you do, fellow kids?" So he reaches out to try to lure this man in to a photo shoot. And then he recently reached out again to Kirk to ask him to donate to his legal fund. The audacity. Kirk says, quote, "It was so desperate. I would encourage anyone who has had an inappropriate interaction with Dan Wootton to come forward and share their story so we can get to know the true scale of these activities," end quote. And it's not just celebrities that he's doing this to. It seems like he just gets a rise out of wielding control over people. In April of 2018, Dan booked an at-home sports massage through a reputable home agency. The good-looking 21-year-old straight man that came to his house to perform the massage did tell Dan that he was struggling financially. Not 4 minutes after leaving Dan's house, he receives this text message. Another, "Hey man, thanks so much for that. Know you said just then double rent, etc. Didn't want to ask you while still here in case not interested, but could I potentially get you for some type of extra now? Have a $1,000 budget, so VV good money. Let me know before you go too far. Thanks." And he's like, "No, Dan." And Dan's like, sure, but what about modeling work outside of massages? Like, can you not enjoy an at-home massage without thinking about your next victim? It's truly pathological behavior. Dan's representatives did not comment to Byline Times, but they did comment this past week to The Guardian. Quote, "Wootton did not at any time contact current or former colleagues at The Sun with offers of money in return for sexually explicit images and did not engage in inappropriate behavior in the workplace," end quote. But Byline goes on to say that he has still never denied being connected to one Martin Branning or Maria Joseph. I think it's significant that reality TV stars and celebrities have started to come forward. My guess is that Byline Times might be still trying to nurture other contacts and encouraging them to speak out, and maybe this article will help move the needle. At a certain point, presumably, you can't ignore the mounting evidence against Dan. Back to the timeline of Byline Times coverage of Dan. The through line in all of these stories is a pattern of behavior from Dan and similar tactics that he uses to try to get what he wants. And a lot of times it's down to financial manipulation and perhaps really getting off of the feeling of having power over other people. But I think it's also damning to News of the World, which is obviously now closed, The Sun, and the Daily Mail. Because as Alex says in the August 1st article, quote, "Working for Murdoch, that environment, which was very ruthless, very cutthroat, very competitive for the biggest stories, changed him. It enabled the worst parts of him and amplified them," end quote. So it sounds like Dan thrives in this kind of workplace environment that, at least Murdoch has told us, has completely changed since they shut down News of the World. The media has reformed. Those were 2012 and earlier problems. But some of this behavior is coming up in 2018 and potentially even more recent examples. And I can't keep thinking that is one reason to continue to protect or at least stay silent on the Dan coverage. Byline has promised more coverage to come, so stay tuned.